Hello and welcome to Setting the Stage, Episode 2, Carina and Ciokotai. Our guest today is Carina. Hi Carina, welcome to the show. Can you start off by introducing yourself and telling us a little about who you are outside of Dungeons & Dragons?
My name is Carina, and I am a college student majoring in English because I've just always it's always been a strong interest of mine, like storytelling and stuff. It's just that is my thing. So I'm kind of trying to be the best storyteller that I can be, trying to further my education in that regard. Other than just like education and interest and stuff like that, I would say I'm a little bit on the naturey side. If I get cooped up inside for too long, I start doing not so well. My family runs cattle, so I have to be out in the country all the time. Yeah, it's sometimes, even if it's just a drive from point A to point B, and it's going to be a short 15-minute thing, there's a need to be outside.
Do you have a lot of nature stuff around where you are?
Yeah, kind of. There's definitely a lot of forested areas, a lot of open fields, rivers, stuff like that. I'm in close proximity to quite a few lakes for fishing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's cool.
And all that's and also I grew up constantly being brought out to the country, so it's always been nature's been a huge part of just my life, and that's influenced a lot of my storytelling as well. It usually has just some kind of strong presence in anything I write.
Oh yeah, that's it's good to have that personal connection to your work. That's good.
Yeah. Maybe I do a little bit too much sometimes. I'm trying different things in other areas, but it's always usually one of those core things that I mess with in just anything.
Right. Well, let's get started on the D&D portion.
All right.
How did you start playing, and how did you start becoming a DM after that?
I started playing several years ago in high school, sort of. It was weird. There was a friend of mine got really into, I believe she got into D&D podcasts, and there just so happened to be a D&D club at her school. And so she's like, hey, do you want to join this with me? And I had absolutely no idea what it was, but I was like, you know what? Sure. And unfortunately, that first original club, it ended up fizzling out. That was 4th edition, I believe. It fizzled, and it kind of, we played one session, so I guess that's technically my first time playing D&D. And it kind of it fell out of my mind for several years until my friends started bringing up D&D again. And this time around, she's like, you know what? I'm just I'll DM a campaign. And that just so happened to line up with another D&D club at this high school. And that's kind of the start of that, at least. Her campaign, my friend's campaign that she ran, that was my first solid D&D experience. That lasted more than a single session, at least.
Right.
Which now this is 5e now, not 4th edition. I started DMing though when that aforementioned club, they I think we broke it up into 2 semesters. The first semester had a few DMs, and I was a player in one of those guys' campaigns. But then once the semester ended, the club was like, hey, we need new DMs to do things for the club. And I was starting to get an idea for a story that I wanted to do, and I volunteered to DM. But that's right about when COVID hit, so I never ended up doing it for the school, but I did start DMing for my friends.
That's a pretty big high school D&D club to have multiple DMs.
Yeah, we had a decent number. I know that we our numbers were large enough to, at least we had we were actually one of the floats in our homecoming parade. I was in that.
Oh, wow.
I was
Okay.
so nerdy, and I was a nerd in front of the entire town, but you know what? I don't regret it.
We just had one per class for our homecoming float parade thing, so nothing that
See,
diverse as different clubs. That's pretty cool.
we did I think our thing was per club.
All right, cool. Yeah, I think the D&D club at my school had 5 or 6 people, and it was small enough that I didn't even care to go to it. I was just playing with my friends instead.
I see. Yeah, we definitely had several times the amount of people.
Okay. Yeah, so you started playing, and then you started DMing. Is that when you started making your campaign world, or did that develop after that initial DMing that you did?
A bit of both. I'm still DMing basically the same campaign. It's been like 2 years since then. It was basically mostly me just like homebrewing a campaign, and there was actually I'd have to go find the books, but mostly my own homebrew thing. But I took a lot of inspiration from I don't know where this stands in like the official stuff for D&D, but I have a bunch of these little books that are on the dragons, and I got them when I was like too little to even know what like D&D was, and I just like grew up with that, and then I later found out that it was a bunch of just D&D stuff, and it's just a bunch of like information, just supplemental stuff on like dragons, and so I wanted to do something with that. So I guess I took that from like a lot of the official stuff, but I'm not super familiar with most of like the actual like lore. I just kind of did my own thing.
Okay. What is the name of your campaign world, and can you give us like a physical description of it?
Okay, the name of the campaign world as a whole is Terra, which is mostly an oceanic planet that just has a single continent on it, like polar caps and archipelagos, and that's it. It's just ocean otherwise.
Okay.
Regarding, I think the most developed thing is that main continent, and specifically where my current campaign is taking place is a country called Ciokotai, which is very, I wouldn't call it entirely temperate, but it's supposed to be kind of, it's got a mix of like hot and cold areas, but mostly it's just that like typical like like forested or like Rocky Mountains kind of setting.
Okay. Can you get more specific for Ciokotai? Is that the same as the rest of the continent, or is it a little bit different?
So the rest of the continent, so I kind of did. There's a total of 4 different, I guess you could say, countries in the continent. And Ciokotai, they're all kind of based around, I think it's cold, temperate, warm, and then one that's a little bit of something else. Ciokotai, again, it's got like temperate forests, Rocky Mountains, but it also does have like a desert and some snowy mountains and taigas. One of the other countries is a lot of more taigas and like snowy mountains, but that one has a lot more tundras, moorland, kind of things like that. There's also, I think there's a small volcanic chain over there. This is really nerdy. I'm also really into geology. I have like the what is it? The tectonic plates mapped out as well.
Oh,
That's
okay.
a little side
Cool.
comment there. But so that country is supposed to be more of that cold themed one, and another one, the warm themed one, is a lot of savannas, deserts, rainforest, jungle, that kind of thing.
Okay.
The last country, quote unquote, is a little funky because it's a mix of very high snowy mountains and like deep, rich green valleys. But that's also the portion where that's like right above the Underdark, which is a thing that I did bring into my setting. And that's kind of the Underdark's one of the highlight regions of that. That area is kind of funky as a whole, though, and I think that's the one that I've worked on the least because it's been the least or going there for the party at least has been like the least plot relevant at the moment.
I think everybody brings the Underdark in some form, like just having monsters underneath the ground is pretty primal.
Yeah, I mean it's the Underdark. It's just fun to have.
Okay, so that's the physical groundwork, and you said most of your stuff isn't in each of those countries. It's in the country Ciokotai. Can you tell me more about like the people are there and like the political structure of that country?
The people, I tried to this was kind of mostly for my players. I wanted like them to have like a freedom of choice when it came to like what race they wanted their character to be. So Ciokotai has almost everything. But there are some more dominant species, and I have Ciokotai split up into 4 regions, which is chaparral, desert, forest, and mountains, and each one kind of has a different like dominant race. Mountains would be Aarakocra and Goliath. forest is Kenku and elves, chaparral is halflings, and desert is turtles and lizard folk. Regarding the political climate of the whole thing, there kind of isn't one, and that's kind of a big part of the plot and a big part of the whole problem that needs to be solved with Ciokotai. Each of the regions does kind of have a little bit of their own thing going on. Right now in the campaign, actually, the desert, the whole system that they used to have just got overthrown, and a new system is being brought in. The chaparral region.
Chaparral, for the people who are listening in their car and might not have access to a dictionary, is you want to explain it?
That's actually technically the biome like where I live. It's a lot of it's like very dry, like shrubland. You're thinking like dry forests with like a lot of like open grassy areas with a handful of trees. I believe white oaks is very common. It's just very like dry kind of scrubland-ish sort of biome. Kind of, I think.
But it still gets water, so it's not like a desert.
Yeah, it still does get water, not very much. I kind of know a lot about the water system here. There's kind of it's mostly it kind of has not really proper seasons. It's mostly there's like a dry and a wet, in my life experience at least. It gets water on rare occasions.
Okay, but I mean you have enough plants that you wouldn't say it's like a real desert.
Yeah, it's not really a real desert. I would compare it to to describe, I guess, what it looks like. I would call it like, imagine like an oak savanna. It's weird.
Okay, no, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, you were getting into the political discussion.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that one's kind of lacking in an overall connected system, which again is part of the whole problem. The mountainous area does have a kingdom, but since the region is so large, it's lacking in proper connections at least, but it does have a kingdom. And the forest is probably where the most interesting stuff is happening when it comes to the political stuff. It is currently in the middle of a civil war.
Oh, okay. So it's a country, but I feel like this is more like a region because you have like one kingdom within the country and like a civil war that doesn't even involve that kingdom.
Yeah, it's really, as the parties come to learn over the course of the campaign, Ciokotai can barely be called like a proper country. It's kind of just a mess.
Okay. So from what you said, it used to be a country, is that right?
Yes, it used to be a proper country. It used to be properly unified, but there's been kind of there was a cataclysmic event that caused a massive downfall.
All right. Do you want to give more details on that, or is that, don't want my players listening in on the podcast?
Yeah, because I know they're going to be listening in on this. They don't know too much about the cataclysm right now. They know that it had to do with the downfall of Ciokotai's pantheon of gods, and that the gods are they're kind of nearly totally forgotten. And it's also kind of the point where they've realized that Ciokotai kind of stopped recording its own history, which is definitely not something that any country should ever do.
Okay. What are the gods that exist in Ciokotai, or don't exist anymore?
Well, I guess there is one that technically doesn't exist. Technically, there's a pantheon of 10. They're all like how I mentioned earlier with me being a very nature themed. All of the gods in Ciokotai at least are themed around nature, and more specifically, I kind of base them all around the different like damage types that would be like like radiant, fire, cold, lightning, stuff like that. So that's why there's 10 of them. Technically, it gets kind of funky with there's this technical 11th. The party found out that one of the gods was killed off and was then reincarnated as a new one. And there's a lot of blurred lines over like whether it's a new individual or not. The party doesn't know quite yet. But that one kind of took over the cold element.
Okay. And what were they before?
It was still cold. It's just that they kind of, one god died, another god kind of reincarnated / took its place. The party's not 100% sure what happened with that one.
Okay. And my experience with gods is it can easily be both.
Yeah, it's kind of like that sometimes.
Yeah, my gods are in my campaign are based off of the Greek gods. So oftentimes like I have to choose which myth I'm going to have be like the real story.
Ah.
Because I think, well, for example, Aphrodite has like 3 different sets that are her parents.
Mm, I
So
see.
that can change like her relationships with the other gods. So I mean, you can pick one that's true, or you can just say, yeah, they're all true, and it just depends on what you need to be true at the time.
That's a very interesting perspective on things. That's kind of cool.
So 10 elements, or
We'll say 10 and a half.
damage types, I guess.
Um,
Yeah, 10 and a half. What made you go for that? Just seemed something interesting at the time, or?
God, actually, that is a great question. How did I end up doing this? I think it is a little bit of like an interesting at the time sort of thing. I think so. I knew that I wanted to do a pantheon of some sort, and I was slowly building it over the course of time. And I think I wanted to give myself like a set limit for like how many gods there would be, and to give them a certain theme. And
Mhm.
I don't know why I picked the damage types, but I just thought like I think it would be a neat way to like kind of connect them to some of the mechanics of D&D. So I think that's why I did that. Different pantheons that I have in the worlds, which are usually associated with the different countries, they might be associated with different things. For example, one of the countries, their pantheon has 8 gods, and each one is based around a school of magic.
So the different countries have different gods?
Yes, they're technically the type of entity is very similar. They're all oh, this is also a thing that I did. All of them, they're elementals. And that was kind of, I think I wanted to do something that I hadn't really seen before. I've seen a lot of like gods associated usually with like celestials, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go for an entirely different approach, and I went with elemental. So they're all a specific type of elemental. But they differ. Usually, the different countries, yes, they have different pantheons, and like with Ciokotai being based around nature, a different one, the one that I gave the example, that one's based around magic.
Okay, so if they're all elementals, does that mean they're less like anthropomorphic in how they look, or do they look more like just a manifestation of nature if you have
They're
a physical representation?
they're all kind of like I call them all like beast gods of sorts. I was a big inspiration for the campaign was Shadow of the Colossus and Pray for the Gods, which Pray for the Gods was
Okay.
inspired by Shadow. So they're all very animalistic, but they all kind of have some funky thing going on with each of them. And for example, one of them, which would be the fire god, is a coyote. But as I described him to the party, he was kind of like a dried corpse animated by fire.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I guess with 10 gods you do have to like wrap some things together, right? So is that one fire and death for the dried corpse part?
So that one's element at least is fire. Not quite a god of death. I think that one's. I'd have to go look through my notes, but that one's supposed to be um fire, the sun. I think like chaos and madness and like that whole thing. Not necessarily a god of death though.
Okay, yeah, I guess necrotic would make more sense for death.
A little bit, which I do have. The god that is associated with necrotic is a death god, but also like a life god. Kind of, that one's associated with like again like death, life, like rebirth, that whole thing. Kind of just the cycle of nature.
What's the cultural feel to Ciokotai?
So the cultural feel, it's kind of so as I mentioned, how Seacoda is kind of not recording its history anymore, and it's had this huge downfall, and it's just this general mess. Its culture has kind of died off over the course of time, but there are still some tiny little remnants. It still does have some connections to nature. I believe like it's not a very uncommon thing for people to just like have like weird animal companions of some sort. Like if someone walked into town being followed by like an owlbear, like no one would even like blink. That's like just a normal thing. That's like one of the last few remnants of their culture, is being just very accepting of just weird nature stuff. um
Okay.
Dragons are very important to the entire culture. That kind of has to do with like this old war thing and an organization that's kind of fallen over the course of the campaign. But there's definitely this strong respect for dragons, and I believe I'm trying to remember exactly what like the law was, but it's like this is one of the few like continent-wide things that it's kind of it's heavily looked down upon to hunt dragons, and it's like you only really mess with them if they're messing with people, and that's kind of like a whole thing is they're just kind of respected. There's another thing actually that was a recent thing. Is this ties back into the whole nature thing. I think it's like another cultural thing is that it's heavily looked down upon to like wear any sort of like if you had like a fur coat or something like that, it's seen as like super disrespectful and weird to do that because there's just such a strong bond with like the animals and with nature and that whole thing.
That seems very, very different than most Earth culture where fur is like a status symbol.
Mm-hmm.
Is that's Ciokotai? So does that clash with the other countries, which would probably have fur?
It definitely clashes very heavily with a different country, and this one is called Bosmios. That one's heavily based around like technology, and Bosmios and Ciokotai absolutely under no circumstances they do not get along at all. And so I think it's kind of they definitely, because that's that cold region that I mentioned, there's probably a heavy use of like wearing furs and stuff like that, and Ciokotais just having none of it. It's also a normal thing in that culture.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, it's that culture also. They do hunt dragons, and that is like kind of a profession. And again, Ciokotais not they don't like that.
So dragons, what got people started on liking dragons? Have they always been nice in your campaign world? Because usually they're evil big monster.
Yeah, they're it's I did kind of a little bit of a funky thing with that. It's they've not always been allied with dragons, although I can't get into this one too much because this is the thing that my players don't know about. There at least was at least a small past association, but there was this whole event with a war that it was a war with Bosmios. And that one was trying to invade and take over because this was after that cataclysmic event, and Ciokotai it's not a proper country, and they're just like, free land. What kind of happened is that on a minor association is that during the whole war that silver dragons, which are metallic and generally considered good, silver dragons helped Ciokotai during the war, but the dragons only became like really prevalent after this. How do I explain this? There was an elf and a gold dragon that showed up in the middle of the war, like out of nowhere. No one knows where they came from, and they showed up to help Ciokotai in the war. And when this rider and this dragon showed up, it kind of prompted other people to try to form some kind of relationship with dragons and stuff like that. And there ended up being a decently sized team of people and dragons that kind of helped turn the tide of the war, and that is like the sole reason that Ciokotai won. And so after that whole event, it kind of, the entire country owed its continued existence to these riders and these dragons. And so the dragons were like heavily respected after that, and some of them most metallic dragons, because they're generally good to begin with, so there's not much of like a cultural change there and just like respecting them. When it comes to the chromatic, though, I'd have to look at my map. Two chromatic species, which would be red and black dragons, they're not super common, but they are still like if they show up and cause problems for people, they like go out of their way to. They are hunted down, but probably only that one individual. Green dragons, I know that they're less likely to just like go around and just murder things. They're more sly and cunning with their maneuvers. They've not been too much of a problem, though the party has fought a handful of, I believe, the party's dealt with a few green dragons over the course of the campaign. It's kind of the blue dragons where things are the most interesting, because if anyone's read about them, they're a little bit more tactful, I'd say. And so they're kind of more of they kind of skirt around the rules to get things done. and they're a little bit more. I know. What is it? I think it's like the blues are like out of all the chromatics, they're the least evil, generally speaking. So they're kind of just vibing with this system. They've figured out how to exploit it, so they're just they're working with it. White dragons, they're just kind of doing their own thing in the wilderness.
All right. That sounds fairly different from my campaign world, where I have blues as the most evil.
Oh, really?
But it's just a pile of stats, so you can apply whatever you want to it.
Fair enough, yeah. I kind of like to roll with the rules that like nothing is inherently good or evil. It just kind of depends on the circumstances that creature was like brought up in. One of the gimmicks of the party, I mentioned the whole thing with that small organization that formed that was between like riders and dragons. One of the main gimmicks of the campaign, which is like kind of the original idea that I had, was that the party was going to be new recruits into that organization, and so each of them got a dragon egg at the very beginning, and so it hatched over the course of the campaign, and they've been just like raising these wormlings, which surely everyone should know that like wormling is the name for like a young dragon. But
it's in the monster manual and all of that.
Yeah, I just a quick clarification, just in case, although I don't think there needs to be a just in case. But so the party's kind of been like raising these wormlings, and I was given some inherent traits that the player wanted for like each dragon that they were like their character was like bonded with. One of them, there is a red dragon wormling who he's kind of small and cowardly, and he just kind of hides behind his partner the whole time, and he'll have nothing to do with fights.
That's cute. So they still have the wormlings following them around at this point?
They still have the wormlings. I think there's a whole thing with like accelerated aging for like the first few years of the wormling's life, and it's nearly been a year in the campaign. They're almost like hitting that like point of adolescence, and the wormlings they're still with their partners, and that red dragon is still, despite the fact that he's almost the size of a horse, he's still trying to hide behind his partner.
Oh, that's cute. So that sounds like it could have some balance issues, like from designing adventures, if your party has what sound like almost dragon mounts at this point.
Yeah, nearly. The balance issue, because there was my original set of players, I really don't have them anymore. Only a handful of people from the original group are still here, and so actually right now there are only 2 wormlings in the party, and one of them is that cowardly red dragon who he doesn't even need to be told to stay out of fights. He's doing it on his own. He wants nothing to do with it. The other dragon, though, which is a blue dragon, he does want to engage in things, but I've tried balancing things with like enemies so that like there's ways to kind of counter the dragon, and for the most part though we do try to keep like him at least out of combat, because it's just it should be the players doing all the fighting.
Yeah.
But if they still need him for something, if it's like a big mission, they're more than. I mean, they can have him along if they want, if it's something big and important.
Otherwise, they're trying to keep their babies out of the fight.
Basically, yeah. Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else you want to describe about the campaign world itself before we talk about the plot of your campaign that you've been running?
Regarding the world itself, I could say so many different things, because I've just tried to have like each area is kind of like doing its own thing, and it's kind of has its different vibe. There's many things that I could say, but like I think this is because again this is 2 years worth of me like working on this world. There's a lot of things that I could say, but I think like for right now I think I'm good.
Okay. Then yeah, what would you say is something that you want to talk about for your campaign? I know other people have plenty of like different threads that are going. Is there a particular campaign plot that you want to discuss on the podcast?
Let's see here. I've had a bunch of like kind of little plots and more major ones, and then like big overarching ones. I'd say one that I could touch on had to do with how I mentioned how there's kind of been a downfall of culture and this fall of the gods. The party right now, one of the big arcs, and I think this is the one that they're putting most of their focus on. Um, they're kind of so the party right now, they know that part of that cataclysmic event was that each god was kind of separated from their soul, which their soul is like a little physical object. It's like a small crystal that's supposed to be like embedded in the earth. And so all the gods, like, they were separated from the souls. The souls were taken out of where they should be and kind of scattered across the land. And so the party's trying to bring all of those souls back and maybe bring Ciokotai back to a functional state. And right now they're more than halfway done. I think they have 6 of the souls back, and they're in possession of 2, but they're still missing they're still missing the other 2, and they don't know where that is right now. But that's kind of been a huge arc, and it's like the process of like a lot of adventures have been centered around them actually going and getting the souls and figuring out where they are. But a lot of also like research and them like doing like lines of questioning and trying to figure things out have been around like what happened with this cataclysmic event, why did it happen, and just like all sorts of details with that.
Okay, so the gods losing their souls is related to the cataclysm you mentioned. That is
Yes.
where Ciokotai lost its cultural identity, sort of.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the players are looking around for these little crystal things and
Yeah.
also looking for where the crystal things are supposed to go.
Yes.
It is the place they're supposed to go, like you said, embedded in the ground. Is it just like, you have to follow your GPS to find this spot, or is it like, the center of a temple is where
Um,
it's embedded in the ground?
I'm sorry. The follow GPS thing is great because there's a tiny bit of that that's actually slightly accurate. I always keep forgetting that this is supposed to be a small detail, but like the souls, once the party's in possession of it, they kind of get an idea of a direction that they need to travel in, but nothing much more than that. So that's slightly accurate. But in general, they're usually looking for a temple, and I believe the party knows by now that it's like the birthplace of the gods that they need to bring the souls back to. And so each one is kind of like scattered in remote regions throughout the world. And some of the places that they've already brought them back to was like one of them where the soul should be. It was like the ground was carved into an obelisk, so they had to had to get up on the top of the obelisk to put this tiny little thing in at the very top. Other ones were like actually like in the ground, and the temple was built around that site. There's another that was like in like this funky tree of stone. They had to get into the center of that. But
Okay.
so yeah, they're looking for a temple slash the birthplace of a divine being.
So the players are just, is it just the challenge of finding these things and then getting to a difficult location, or is there some force that's opposing them? I feel like that's usually how a campaign would go.
So usually it is like finding the souls and bringing them where they should be, but it is as you're saying, it's not just as simple as that. I think one of my favorite moments in the campaign was where they were trying to find a soul that was associated with a goddess of lightning. And so the soul was up at the very top of this cave in a cliff, and the party had to fight a group of, or a pair of thunderbirds to get the soul. And it was like it's raining, it's like there's thunder and lightning everywhere. They can't see anything. It was a whole ordeal. That was probably one of my favorite fights and just like one of my favorite scenes. I love that moment.
Yeah, it's always nice to bring in like weather into the campaign.
Yes.
I love doing that.
Yeah, I have a bit of a dynamic weather system that I kind of like roll for it a little bit like each week, and depending on the biome that they're in and what season it is, the chance of like, oh, is it sunny, is it cloudy, is there some type of precipitation? It kind of differs depending on the area.
So is that different than what's in the DMG? Because I think there's other stuff like that in there.
There is a system in the DMG. It's a lot more. I guess you could say what is the word? It's a little bit more random. Like you could have I don't know if it's like on a weekly basis or a daily basis, but it could be like clear skies one day and then like horrible storms the next, and it's just like automatic. It happens so quickly that it kind of bothered me. It didn't feel very realistic, so I kind of made my own system.
Okay. Yeah. I guess that's only realistic for like Florida.
You know, or I've heard Kentucky.
Um. Okay. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
God, I guess there's all sorts of things. I'm trying to think of maybe something along the lines more of like the process of building a world and like themes and stuff like that, maybe.
Yeah,
'Cause
sure. So we already talked a bit about like your how you picked the gods. It seems from you talking about where you're living that the physical design of your world came from just somewhat copying the place that you're living in, but not all the way, obviously.
yeah,
Um,
a little bit.
do you feel like there's some connection there for like the lost identity of Ciokotai to how did you get that as an idea? Because that feels like a sort of a unusual thing and having quasi dead gods all over the place as
Yeah.
well.
I'm trying to remember where did I get this idea? I think I mentioned that that Shadow of the Colossus was a big inspiration for me, and
Hmm.
through over the course of that game, there's all these there's the Colossi, but there's also this general sense that there was once a civilization here. There was something happening, but I know that it's never really properly explained like what is going on, and so I think that was an inspiration for me. It's just like the thought process of what could have once been here. And so that's I think that's what led into me doing the whole lost identity thing. Also, I thought it'd be kind of interesting, and I think I was trying to like work my way around like, well, how did people actually forget about the gods? What happened? But I think it was that inspiration kind of started me down this path. And I've tried
Okay.
playing around with interesting ideas from there. One There was a time where I was telling one of my friends about like my world building process and like going with that whole lost identity and that whole history thing. I was kind of thinking, if you really think about it, humanity would kind of if we just went like realistically speaking here, if we just went back like 200 years ago and we completely stopped writing history from there, and the only way to learn anything was because like someone nearby told you about it, you could probably imagine how quickly like society would lose its identity.
Yeah, yeah, there would be, I mean, places would still have identity, but you would have much less of a national
Hmm.
identity.
And that's kind of an idea that I was like toying around with for Sea Kodai. Just like what happens when not only when we lose our history, but when we lose communication. When there's not like an established, if the only thing you know is what's happening like near you, and if some traveler shows up.
Okay. Yeah, that's that reminds me of like Ursula K. Le Guin's science fiction stuff where the different human colonies on different planets are so separated through time because of how long it takes to travel between them that they've basically become different species.
That I don't believe I'm super familiar with like that work, but I mean that's pretty interesting, and that does seem like that's how that would work.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different books that she wrote about the science fiction stuff. I think she wrote like 10 that are all within the same universe, but because they're on different planets that aren't connected very well, they actually aren't that well connected in like
Interesting.
characters or technology or anything. It's just sort of it's all assumed to be the same universe.
I got you. That's neat. Yeah, it's just if there's a lack of connection and communication, things start dividing, and there's differences begin developing, and especially when it's something that's supposed to be a nation, doesn't write its history, has no idea who it is, it's just lost all of that, things just kind of start falling apart.
Yeah, yeah, totally. That definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
And I can see how having all of your gods go into sleep, I guess, because they're not quite dead.
They're kind
Uh,
of think, how do I say? Very lacking in power and very not mentally here right now.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Yeah. Not knocked out, knocked unconscious, I guess.
not quite.
Don't want to get all
The par
D&D on it.
the party knew that one of them was preferring to stay in some type of slumber. There was another one that was like wandering the desert trying to find things, but he was so out of it he doesn't even know what he's looking for or why he's looking.
Okay.
Just and if you have like a vast, massive freaking desert with absolutely no one in it, he's probably not going to find anything, which he didn't.
I was just thinking, you mentioned Shadow of the Colossus
Yes.
twice now as an inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't played the game, but I have heard about it. In that game, aren't you basically more fighting gods than trying to resurrect them?
Yeah,
So
and that
is
one,
that
yeah.
so what made you want to change that aspect of the game?
Um, I have no idea. Um,
Okay.
hmm.
Not everything needs a connection. I was just curious about
Yeah,
that.
that's fair. Yeah, and that's that's a good question to ask because I mean some people might have an answer to stuff like that. Looking back, I don't know why I did that. No, yeah, I don't know.
All right.
No.
Anything else you wanted to touch on?
I think one other tiny thing, because me mentioning that whole history thing, that did remind me of another thing, and it was I kind of messed around with the idea of things being connected, but not necessarily like directly so. I kind of, how do I say? It's like different events having the same or the same catalyst, but other than that, they're completely unconnected. And I kind of that was something that I messed around like a lot with. I'd say for most of the things, most of the plot points like in the world, um, almost everything has the same catalyst, but it's just there's like varying different results depending on like how directly things were and weren't affected and how far away different populations were. And I kind of this is like it's a weird comparison, but I think it proves my point. Comparing to like real world history, British imperialism and just imperialism in general kind of really started a lot of events all around the world. And while like different nations might be entirely just separate from each other, they might have some sort of association with that. To make a real world example.
Yeah. Or like how the Black Plague
Mm-hmm.
affected a lot of Europe's history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even if populations aren't, yeah, exactly that. Even if they're not directly associated with one another, there's this same catalyst event that affected the different populations.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally get that.
Yeah, that's an idea that I toyed around with, which the party doesn't know too much about specifically that, but it's there are some very direct and very loose connections all to the same thing.
Do you have any advice you want to give other DMs on like creating a world or running a campaign?
Regarding world building, I'm not too sure what I'd have to say other than like just go feral. Like if you think something might be cool, just do it. Obviously with like respect to the players, which does bring up I think what I think I'd have probably more advice for like actually like running the whole thing, and more than anything else, communication is super important. Making everything clear between players, and like if you have an issue, like talking it out instead of just like I don't know, being mad about it. Communication is just so
Hmm.
important.
Yeah, like I think something that comes up on Reddit a lot is making sure people have like a list of boundaries that they want
Yes.
respected during the game.
Yes, absolutely. I think like having like player consent for certain things, it's so important. And even if like like because I play with friends that I've known for years, so usually I have a pretty good grasp on like what they will and won't be okay with. But even then, saying like, hey, I might do this, is this going to be okay? An example that I would give was the party was kind of working on this infiltration sort of mission where they were dealing with a bunch of people who were slavers, and they were kind of doing this whole
Hmm.
thing with like pretending to sell certain members of their own group to these people. And I remember like a part of the plan, I was like, hey, if you do this just because of the type of, these type of people, there might be some sleazy things. Are you comfortable with that? And, I got what everyone was and wasn't fine with. And of course, there's also like common sense as well. But just like being very clear on what people are and aren't fine with, like that's just so important.
Yeah, for sure. I was just thinking that like my campaign world has the Greek gods, so I mean, if I'm really hewing to the original content, there would be a lot more rape, because
Yeah.
that's what the stories have a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really want to have that in my
Oh, yeah.
fun time that I'm having with my friends. So yeah, it's not there.
Yeah, no, I entirely understand that, and there's definitely like that's part of that whole common sense thing. And D&D, after all, it is supposed to be a game, and so it should be a fun environment for everyone, and people, shouldn't be reminded of some things that may make them really uncomfortable like that. And I mean that's usually like a common sense sort of thing. But even just asking people like, hey, is there something, even if it's like oddly specific, that just like really makes you uncomfortable, do tell me about that so I can avoid putting that in my game.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about boundaries here, but
Yeah.
I feel like tailoring your campaign to your players goes beyond that. Like
Mm-hmm.
it can be, one of my players wanted to have an adventure where they slayed a dragon, so I made an adventure where they slayed a dragon.
Which is awesome.
And yeah, and players also usually have a wish list of magic items that they want, so you should like try and you don't want to have one every adventure necessarily, but you should try and have that be the treasure that you're placing for players to get.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the other things that the DMG mentions that usually comes up is you just want to match play style.
Yes,
Which
definitely.
isn't necessarily something you can do because like if you want to have like a role-playing intrigue political adventure and you have a bunch of players that want to do a hack and slash campaign, there just isn't compatibility there.
Mm-hmm. I definitely understand that. We had some early on. I mentioned how I have only a handful of players from that like start of the campaign. I definitely think there were some compatibility issues there. But there was also, which is where my whole thing about communication comes in, there was definitely some communication issues on my part. And I kind of I learned my lesson, and it's unfortunate, but I'm just going to take that whole event, some questionable choices that I made early in my DMing, and I'm just going to learn from it. And that's definitely why I'm saying these things about communication. It's so important.
Yeah, and I feel like it's not just that we're learning to be better at playing D&D, but we're learning to be better people too.
Exactly that too. Yeah. But yes, to comment on your thing mentioning the whole like certain adventures and like magic items and stuff like that. I do believe there was a point. This was this had been over a year ago, but I did ask some of my players like, hey, or not some, sorry, all of my players. I asked. I promise there's no selective like favoritism. That's not what I meant.
You misspoke. It's all good.
I misspoke. But I did try to ask all of them like, hey, what is an item that you think that you would like really like for your character to have? And so I do believe the people who did make specifications, I think they got their item. I remember I'm pretty freaking sure they got what they wanted. Another thing is like I think respecting like the backstories of different characters and kind of like working that into the world and working with the player and like maybe making it, or I wouldn't say maybe, but like making an arc around that backstory so that the player feels like properly engaged and like their character really is a part of the world. I've with all of my players, I have all their characters somehow their backstory is important to everything.
Yeah, that's definitely in it. That definitely makes the game more fun. You can make it so that they have ownership over the story because you've
Definitely.
included something that they created.
Mm-hmm.
I will say another aspect of like making everybody comfortable is sometimes you'll have players that don't want to have that type of attention drawn to them,
Which is fair.
and it's okay to not do that.
Mm-hmm.
Which isn't necessarily what happens in your case or my case, but I've definitely seen that happen before where, sometimes someone just wants to hang out with their friends and doesn't need to be the center of the attention for the game.
That's a very fair perspective, and I think, that might just go back to the communication. Each person's different. Some might want it, some might not, and that is a very fair point to bring up.
Well, Anything else you wanna touch on while we're here?
Just making sure like players do have like some form of agency and some amount of control in what they do. To get into a different error in my DMing, I kind of there's kind of like too much happening at once, and it kind of was pulling the players like this way and that. And I was spoken to, and I was definitely stubborn at first. I'm not going to claim being perfect in this. I was kind of stubborn about like kind of putting a hold on all these different things that were happening, but I did do it. I was like, well, fine. And then I ended up like really liking that, and it helped me DM even better, and it helped the party like feel less stressed out. So definitely think like listening to the players and like giving them like, instead of like pushing them in multiple like different directions, let them pick the different directions. And if they are doing like absolutely nothing and they need a nudge, then they need a nudge. But I think generally speaking, the players will figure out what they want to do, and just pulling them all over the place, just it's kind of not the greatest thing.
Yeah, I'd usually say the best way to design an adventure is something that you want to do as the DM, or something that the players want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, usually like there's a bit of a social contract when you're playing D&D. So if you present a plot hook, the players should really take the plot hook, because that's what you brought for them to play.
Which is a fair point, and that was another issue early on in my DMing, where I would have those plot hooks and they kind of wouldn't be touched, which that had to do with the whole playstyle thing, I think. But yeah, no, I agree with that. I think something that I tried to do, which I did kind of mess up a little bit. I did try to let them, like, I dropped like a bunch of hooks, and I just wanted them to like pick what was important, and then I'd make the campaign like around that. They just ended up picking up like all of the hooks, so all of it became important. Which I think in the future I'll try to maybe limit it to just specific arcs. But at the very least, if anything can be gathered from this, let the players have some amount of agency what they want to do.
Yeah, that's always good advice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, thanks for coming on the show, Carina. It's been a pleasure.
And I thank you for having me.
That was Carina and her campaign, Ciokotai.